Supreme Court has made several rulings that affect the coming midterms, including stopping efforts to hurt mail ballot counting. But there's also the actual voting. You can hear the music. We have another election night in America with primaries in Colorado, which could impact what happens in D.C. A handful of hardline House Republicans also bucking the Speaker over a key defense bill, precisely because of the related issue that they didn't get an election meddling proposal in that Trump wants. Meanwhile, Trump is blocking something the House has actually achieved, which is the housing bill. He says it's a big yawn.
I don't know. I think it's so unimportant by compared to the Save America. Compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
Trump making a big point of the fact that this is a yawn, that he's bored by a bill that actually affects people's lives and housing and their access to affordable housing, among other issues, because he's just thinking about elections, which is, as usual, a politician thinking about themselves. And what he wants to do is meddle in the midterms. I'll remind you, the Republican Senate leader already said that bill that Trump referenced isn't going to make it out into law this year. Meanwhile, speaking of things that are more focused on himself than the good of the American public, Trump privately awarded a $500 million no-bid contract for the ballroom. The Post reporting on that. The White House claims it was all done according to rules. There's also new details on a construction at the White House South Lawn. Remember, we had that UFC bash. There's a new helipad for Trump, and the major defense contractor involved with it does government business, Lockheed Martin. They have, we should note, donated millions of dollars to help cover the cost. Now, how's this all faring out there? There's polling that shows Republicans are worried about Senate races in places that used to be completely safe. In deep red Texas, they have, according to the polls, a dead heat. Democrat James Talarico is facing the scandal-plagued Republican candidate Ken Paxton. This was Trump's idea, to put in what was an unproven, more controversial figure in Paxton than the sitting Republican senator. If you need a reminder of why Republicans are mad at Trump for different reasons than Democrats, well, you're looking at one. They have to at least spend more money and time on Texas being a dead heat, let alone the possibility they could lose it. Republicans say Trump is basically acting out of touch, that there are many gaffes, and some of it is tailor-made for campaign attacks.
Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody.
I don't care about the midterms.
Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning? Could that be a
No, I love it. The numbers were great.
You know what I really love?
I love the inflation. I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up.
Many have noted that President Trump is not the communicator he once was, and that is a nonpartisan issue. The former President, Joe Biden, also saw some diminution of some of his political skills, but writ large, I'm not sure Republicans would want everyone to even hear any communication coming from Trump, at least on those pocketbook economic and housing issues. We're back with New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg, an MS Now political analyst, following these midterms, including a Texas tie that is pretty striking. Talarico at 47. This is a pretty reputable poll in a pretty big state, New York Times, Siena, against Paxton, who appears to be doing worse than the person that he replaced because of Trump.
Right. And I think that was extremely predictable that Paxton would be doing worse. Look, Paxton was already running ahead even before Trump's endorsement, but Trump's endorsement possibly could have turned things around for John Cornyn. And I think that if those two are running even, Paxton, who is so scandal-plagued, kind of so followed by such, Rococo corruption, is kind of still, has financial scandals, sex scandals, was impeached by a Republican Texas House. And so if he's running even with Talarico, you have to imagine that if John Cornyn was still in the race, who's been senator forever, he would be doing more comfortably. And, we've seen this before with Trump, right? It's kind of one of the reasons that we have two Democratic senators from Georgia, which used to be considered a solidly red state, is because Trump decided to go in all in behind Herschel Walker, another kind of totally unfit candidate. And so it obviously doesn't mean that James Talarico is going to win Texas. But like you said, it means that they have to fight for it.
It's funny watching this. We were talking about where we are in the Supreme Court at the top of the hour and how much Trump has changed things. Here, though, on the politics, a lot of Republicans would prefer if Trump disappeared. He's so loud that that's seen as an impossibility. But in normal-ish eras, we've heard about, oh, people want to keep distance from Obama or they don't want a Biden visit. That seems to be the mood of a lot of these Republicans, but they're in an information environment where you're not allowed to say that about dear leader.
Well, I'm actually not sure if that's true. I mean, because they're in a bind. They've come to rely on a lot of these irregular voters that don't turn out when
right,
Donald Trump is on the
alternate
ballot.
universe, yep.
You know, right? And they've shed a bunch of their sort of like high propensity upper middle class suburbanites. You know, Donald Trump has just announced that they're doing some sort of like midterm convention for the first time and they're going to do it in Texas, right? Presumably he thinks that that is a way to pull this out, to put on a big show.
Yeah, tell us more about that, because we've heard of conventions, but you're pointing out that's actually unusual.
You don't have conventions, right? You usually have conventions every 4 years when you're either nominating president or running for re-election. They have not before had midterm conventions, and presumably, I mean, I would assume that part of the reason they're doing it in Texas is to hopefully juice excitement there. But I think it's also that kind of Trump is, you know, you were talking earlier about how he is bored of, right, he thinks that the housing bill is a big yawn,
yeah.
right? There was reporting that he found that he had gotten bored of the Iran war, right? He finds governing really boring. What he likes to do is decorate and put on shows. And so he's going to go to Texas and put on a show.
It's giving Caligula. Like that's late stage Trumpian lame duck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the kind of tragedy is that for all of his machismo, he probably would have been happier as First Lady, you know, where he could just devote himself to...
Michelle, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say that. And it's interesting, putting aside the gendered history of all that, you're pointing out that if there were a role that were described as ceremonial, decorating, optics,
right, new ballrooms, that kind of, yeah, like, you know, going over the kind of plans, talking about gilding, you know, super gluing tchotchkes to the wall. That, you know, that's kind of what gets him, that's what gets him excited.
We might have your next New York Times column on your hands, just brainstorming it right here. I think that's a really interesting point, and it also speaks to a fundamental superficiality. The promise of Trump, which he managed to revive for some voters in 24, was that he would turn those, whatever you call them, tactics and skills, the reality show, he would turn it towards governing. He would turn it towards negotiation. There are people, and I've interviewed them, I'm sure you have, who said, well, I want him to do The Apprentice, but with these other countries and get us better deals.
Right.
But you're pointing out that hasn't happened.
And I think that what probably no piece of propaganda has done more damage in, at least since World War II, than The Apprentice, right? Because the whole premise of The Apprentice is that Donald Trump was a great deal maker, and we are still living with the consequences of that fantasy, but it was always a fantasy.
It was a show. I mean, that's the thing about reality shows. Even people who like them, like, they know they're not real, mostly.
Mostly.
But then they feel like eventually that is that person.
Right, but I think with Donald Trump, people really did think that he was this kind of like titan of industry, that he was this extremely respected businessman.
Right.
And so, you know, and that, I think that maybe... Yes, and that was an impression that was solidified with The Apprentice, and that has somehow never gone away, even though you can kind of see Donald Trump systematically do to the United States what he previously did to casinos in Atlantic City or Trump University. I mean, this is a person who kind of just, you know, he constantly overreaches and either destroys things or leaves his own supporters or his own customers high and dry. And yet somehow the illusion doesn't go away. We've been waiting for it to go away for a decade.